Hi there, my name's Ben and I like to read. Today we're going to be reviewing perhaps one of the most difficult books that I've read in recent memory, perhaps ever, and that is John Milton's classic poem Paradise Lost. Just a little bit about Milton before we get into before we actually get into analyzing the book, or in fact the long form poem. John Milton was an English writer. He lived, in the 1600s, so around the 16th century. He was imprisoned in the Tower of London for quite some time due to his writing, and he lived to be a very old man. I guess an analog for him probably would be like Thomas Hobbes, except he was certainly much less political, or so you'd think, than Hobbes. But essentially, when he wrote Paradise Lost, which is actually the first part of three, so there's Paradise Lost, Paradise Found, and Paradise Regained. He was blind when he wrote this, so obviously he couldn't see the pen and paper that he was writing with. So he actually dictated this whole poem to a scribe, who then wrote it down and transcribed everything, and then they published it. Essentially what it is, it's a retelling of the story of Genesis. So in the Christian and Jewish Bibles, the creation of the world by God, the fall of man, so on and so forth. This is, of course, the first part of that. So it takes place before the earth has been completed, right, or while the earth is still being made. It talks about the war in heaven, and of course, the defeat of Lucifer, who then becomes Satan, and then the creation of the earth, creation of Adam and Eve, and then of course the parable of the serpent in the garden, and man and the fall of man. What's unique about this is that Milton portrays Satan, at least this is what I got from it, Satan's almost portrayed as a very tragic character rather than just straight out evil. Milton, there's a lot of detail about the war in heaven, about, Satan being cast down from the heavens and landing on earth, partly due to his own choice. And I mean, again, I should preface this by saying this isn't going to be a religious discussion in any sense, mainly because I am an atheist. I don't believe in any sort of God or any of that hokum. But it is interesting to read these retellings. It is interesting to look at devotional paintings. And I mean, again, it's a little bit ironic where they one of the commandments is thou shalt not make graven images of me, and so on and so forth. But then where would the whole Western Western canon of art be without devotional paintings? So it seems a little bit ironic to me. Also, at the same time, back to it, in a very classical sense, Milton portrays the concept of hell as being as far away from God as possible, because that's in the initial interpretations of the time. Hell wasn't necessarily this pit of fire and brimstone. Hell, in what it was supposed to mean, was essentially just a being removed from God. And the reason why Lucifer, or Satan, becomes this, again, he is this perfect being. He is the leader of the angels. He is the morning star, the best and the brightest of them. And he asks the question: Why are we doing this? Why are we just blindly following orders, right? Why do we have to take it from this guy? Oh, because I created you. Okay, but can you at least give us a little bit of context with why are you creating these? Why are these beings? There is a little bit of jealousy right there, because God's like, yeah, I'm creating these beings, and all they need to do is just believe in me and everything's going to be good. And so, of course, he leads a rebellion, 1/3 of heaven against the other 2/3. Angelic hosts abound. A terrible battle ensues. He loses and gets cast out, lands on Earth. And then this is where he starts, gathering his army. And picking up the pieces and saying, okay, fine, you know what? I don't even want to, I want to be as far away from that tyranny as possible. And maybe this is an excessively atheistic reading of Paradise Lost, but this is at least what I got from it, because in order to fully become yourself, you almost have to remove yourself from that domineering, overarching influence, such as, let's say God in this case. And this is what Lucifer does, becoming Satan, right? You can almost read it, especially when, the whole parable of the serpent, when he tempts Adam and Eve to eat from the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Again, before they ate the fruit, they were essentially, okay, I know, we have our jobs, they're living in pure bliss, pure harmony, not they weren't self-aware, but again, like they were, you could say they lived a blissful life. And then, of course, they eat this fruit, they break this rule, and then all of a sudden they become self-aware. They have knowledge now, they know themselves, but because they broke that rule, they've now removed themselves from God. It almost goes to show that, again, you have to step sometimes you have to step away from those boundaries that are set in order to truly know who you are as a person. And of course, this comes at a cost. Now that they are aware, now that they are, now that they realize, okay, yes, we are human beings with agency, this is who I am, they get punished for it. And they are cast out into the world, essentially. And they have to work their way back. Hence, this is where Milton leaves us on a cliffhanger where, we lost paradise, but we may find it again, and we could possibly regain it. But again, this is really just about the first part of it, and I think this is so interesting. The fact that maybe this wasn't Milton's original intent to have this, excessively atheistic, or at the very least deistic, right poem, but the fact that you're able to interpret it this way through the language that was written, and I mean, keep in mind, the language in here is extremely archaic. This stuff makes Shakespeare look like modern English. It just goes to show that, okay, these people living at that time, they were writing these words in this specific way that is able to be interpreted as such. Because I think, again, as I spoke about in a couple of previous episodes, there is such a link between language and thought. And we don't necessarily know a lot about what the commonplace people thought who lived in the 16th century at that time, mainly because we all assume they're, dirty, living in their hovels or in the cities, mud and filth and rats everywhere. They're probably drunk, uneducated, but perhaps they had questions like the questions that we have right now. Perhaps they have ideas like the ideas that we have right now. Perhaps that is the legacy of losing paradise, which is to, in fact, that now we are able to have self-awareness and we're able to ask these tough questions and to be skeptical. And where this links back into like how people back then thought is that we tend to have in the modern day, we tend to have this sort of stereotype that, okay, they were, excessive God botherers, kind of stupid, but I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think as our language develops, then new concepts develop. But the rudimentary skeleton, if you will, of the idea is still there. And I think it's a fantastically influential poem for that reason. Now, again, into the whole sort of technical nitty-gritty of it, it's long. I mean, this book itself is 450 pages, thereabouts. Almost about 150 pages of this is just straight footnotes. So, thankfully, the Penguin Classics version does have footnotes, but this took me so long to read. and I'm usually a fairly quick reader, but I mean, wow, this poem has 12 books in it, and essentially this is one of those things where it's almost like or Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. You can pick it up, read it, digest, put it down, come back to it later. But even with the notes, it's a really, really tough read. It is definitely not for the faint of heart. If you're going into this thinking, okay, you're going to get some sort of Pollyanna song and dance, praise the Lord, this is not the book for you. If you're also looking into it as a critique of the religion itself, it's also probably not the book for you. This is something the ideas within this book are, I would say it's a very modular book in the sense where you can plug in an interpretation of it and it's going to fit. It may not necessarily be what Milton intended, but I think that's just a massive, massive strength that he's got for this book, that he created with this book. This is the equivalent, the English version equivalent of Dante's Inferno, that's the easiest way to put it. It's not for everybody. And the first part is the best one, but it still has value that lasts through the ages. So if you're interested in some poetry, I would say check it out. It's free verse. It's very, very, it's not going to be rhyming or anything like that. I mean, if you were to, write all of this and make it all rhyme, I would say, hats off to you, good sir. But it doesn't. It's all free verse. But the language itself is beautiful, but it will take multiple readings in order to fully get the whole context and for everything to make sense. This puts some Russian novels to shame. I mean, this makes Dostoevsky look like a cakewalk. That said, it's not East of Eden status. I will wholeheartedly recommend this book over East of Eden, just because, well, go watch my previous video. You know how I feel about that book. It is excessively pedantic. But if you're looking for a challenge, if you're interested in poetry, if you're interested, again, in having your thoughts challenged, if you want to explore a little bit more of the thought to language dynamic in a parable, a retelling, if you will, of a biblical story, check it out, but at your own risk. It's if you decide to accept the challenge. If you're not the biggest fan of poetry, feel free to sit it out. I mean, this is one of those ones where I would certainly say it's very advanced, if not an elite level, and I can say that without conceit. So don't feel bad for missing out on it. You could feel free to skip out on this one because it is certainly not for the faint of hearted. But if you've read it, let me know in the comments below what you thought of it. If you haven't and you're thinking about reading it, pick it up, try it out, and let me know what you think in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching.